Okay. So one of the things that I'm starting to think about is doing a little bit of retrospective work, trying to think about where our world, our country is. We're going into another electoral cycle. And I just think this is the most bizarre age imaginable. It doesn't behave like any previous time. And I hear that we're at peak this and peak that, but I don't see any signs of what I increasingly see is the incoherence slowing down. Are you also perceiving a world that is kind of intellectually unraveling, or are you seeing new kinds of formations that give you the idea that something is actually filling the voids that have been opening up when it comes to coherence?
Well, I worry that this is a kind of cognitive delusion, that to think that the time you're in is always sort of newly chaotic or incoherent, or that civilization's on the brink in some new way in your time. But I'm taken in by it. In our
You've
case.
got to be kidding, man.
Yeah.
This has never happened.
Yeah. No. I mean, this is but there's got to be some name for this, where it's just, it's some kind of recency effect, or clearly there have been periods in history where things really have been on the brink in some new way.
Oh, I don't mean to suggest that this is in general.
No, I don't mean like World War II is about to happen. World War III is about to happen. But I do feel like we are witnessing several sea changes, which I couldn't have honestly said that 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I mean, something has changed, and some things have clearly changed for the worse. And maybe there's a silver lining to this chaos, but I would be hard pressed to find it at the moment.
Well, so when I'm trying to think about what kind of chaos we're in, and using the fact that you and I agree on a lot, which I think makes our disagreements more interesting, because I don't like the ground level he said, she said kinds of disagreements. I don't think they're that interesting. For me, the big thing that's really new is that I can't think of a single institution I trust. There's no place that I can go to for ground truth.
So this is an example. So you take the New York Times, and you and I whinge about the New York Times a fair amount.
I've been watching you transition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've grown pretty dark about the paper
That's
record.
new.
Yeah.
5 years ago, you were somewhere else.
Yeah, but I guess I'm wondering whether the cohort before us 20 years ago had this same litany of complaints about the New York Times, or whether something fundamentally has shifted.
Well, I've been on the New York Times since the 80s.
Okay, so you were early to this party.
Yeah, I was very early to this party.
But something has changed. So is this worse than the 80s?
It's a good question. Depends. Worse isn't the right word, in my opinion. The way I would play with it is, I'd say that its problem has always been the same, which is narrative-driven journalism. And the first clear indication I have of this, I think, was a story about Woodstock, in which the paper told the reporter.
How old are you? You're not that much older than me. I was still in my diapers.
No. I don't remember this as a 3-year-old.
Woodstock is 69?
Yeah.
Okay,
No, it's not that. I remember reading. I will clarify. I remember reading a story about the journalist who was sent to cover Woodstock by the Times, being told, write about the filth and the hippies and the unkemptness. And
strangely, that's a bias that I now share. I at one point I had there was a point in my life in my 20s where I kind of recapitulated the 60s for myself, and had nothing but nostalgia for the 60s that I missed. But now I have a fairly Joan Didion look at the slouching toward Bethlehem moment that was just the level of dysfunction and the non-acknowledgement of dysfunction. It was pretty shocking. So,
but
I'm not really
to take you off the follow that thread, but I'm not going to
come back.
Gambit declined.
Okay.
Okay. What I recall of the story is that the Times had told the reporter what sort of story to file. Right. And the reporter called up the Times and said, I refuse. I'm seeing something different. I'm seeing something inspiring and heart opening, and I'm not going to file that story. So if that's what you want, it's not going to.
And I have cholera.
And I have cholera. So I think that the narrative aspect of the New York Times has been both its structural reason for its importance and the fatal flaw that, in essence, it carries these very long narrative arcs that come from the editorial function at the Times, and that those are written in some sense before the facts are known. And so the facts are then fit to the narratives, and then when the counter narratives occur, the Times really either doesn't report the story, as in they really couldn't handle the situation that happened with my brother because it was exactly counter narrative, or then they distort based on the idea that they need to push things back into the narrative. So I think that has always been present. And there are particular kinds of stories that the Times writes that I find absolutely, I'll go so far as to say borderline evil. And what they do is they crowd out whatever natural inquiry process would be happening. So I'm happy to get into a couple of examples about that. But I would say I think that the problem has been there at the New York Times all along. There are some new things that I see as happening there, like a conflict between the old line journalists with the new line of sort of, Brooklyn-based writers who are telling us how to think. What do you make of it?
I don't know if the Times may be an exception here, but I think generally what's happened in journalism is there's just been a clearing out of real journalists, right? I mean, the business has gotten so bad. And again, the Times and the Post and the Atlantic, there's a few outliers here that are doing well in the age of Trump, at least, sort of well.
Trump is saving their business models.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't doing great before Trump, but now they're doing okay. But the rest of journalism has been gutted, and now we basically have the blogosphere, and it's kind of what the Huffington Post did to the landscape, where you just have a lot of people blogging for free, propping up an ad-based clickbait business model.
Sure. But again, I guess what I want to play with is there something special about institutions? Imagine that you can get all of the interesting articles that you like somewhere, and somebody's saying something interesting, you can piece them together. But the fact that there's no institutional home where you can trust that, like, the Office of Management and Budget or something,
But in some, what I'm saying about journalism in general is that what you think of as the institution, I mean, just like the veneer, the front-facing website, is not even an institution in many cases. It's like it's hard to differentiate what is a blog and what is an actual journalistic resource that has editors and fact checkers and copy editors. And for certain sites, the distinction is apparently non-existent. I mean, so people used to think Salon was real journalism, or The Guardian. I mean, The Guardian has like a kind of the blog side and the Guardian side. You can't tell the difference. You're just reading what somebody wrote. And
you find the same people on Twitter. Who are
and then everyone is nuts on Twitter, whatever their reputation really is, or should have been.
Well, but you could just see their bias. Like, they're not hiding it on Twitter, and then they hide it when they're in their journalistic frame.
Well, I would argue that I'm fairly forgiving on that point, because I feel that Trump has made the hiding of one's so-called bias irresponsible. Essentially, it's like you can't pretend that this is a normal president doing normal things, and you're going to be a normal journalist without an opinion.
Well, I agree with that. Although I would say you and I are very split on this. So to put a placeholder, maybe we'll get back to it, maybe not. That I'm more worried about the loss of things like Nature and Science than I am the New York Times. I'm now worried that there is nothing, even in the hard sciences almost, that can stand up to the onslaught of political pressure creeping into everything that has to be able to say no. That we've lost the ability to tell people to screw off if they're wrong.
Well, it's certainly been creeping up on us in the life sciences. It's been true of the social sciences for a very long time.
Yeah, it probably, physics and math are going to be the last to go, but I've even seen a little bit of inroads there. And so I find the loss of Nature and Cell in the universities terrifying. Differently from the New York Times. Like this is a few layers deeper and more dangerous. Do you not perceive that?
Oh, I think they're just different problems. I don't know which is more consequential. I mean, I think the failure to have a fact-based discussion and the incentives to avoid one, I think that's just the scariest thing we have going, apart from the true monsters of pandemic and nuclear war and things like that.
Well, those are now increasingly relative with the vaxxer anti-vaxxer controversy.
Right.
But there's the self-refereeing. Like one of the things that's really important to have a decent discussion, in my opinion, is that you have to agree on what a discussion is and what constitutes an illegal move. Mm-hmm. And increasingly, I feel like we're having these combat sports where we can't agree on what rules, like is biting an ear part of boxing? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Who's to say? Well, that's an imposition of your views on mine. Who can still self-adjudicate?
Well, I think if you wait long enough, you see the failures of hypocrisy, right? I mean, you see people try to enshrine a new set of rules that prove unworkable in some of the context, or they just can't live up to them because of it's impossible. I mean, we're now noticing, and it's been widely observed, that more or less if you wait around long enough, everyone's going to get canceled. It's like the repurposing of the Warhol quote. We'll all be canceled for 15 minutes at some point.
It's not going to be 15 minutes.
And it's I mean, so we just before we started this podcast, we were joking that Justin Trudeau has yet another blackface photo of himself apparently appearing online, and here's one of the most woke and sanctimonious enforcers of this new norm of just political correctness, stretching to infinity, and he's got not only blackface in his past, but apparently a positive passion for blackface.
That's a recurrent issue.
Yeah, so it's I mean, the hypocrisy is so delicious, but it's just these new norms of not being honest about facts just can't scale. I mean, people will be tripped up by them, and it's not to say we can't do a lot of harm to ourselves in the meantime or in certain areas.
Well, I think we're trying to do harm to ourselves.
Yeah.